One fearless American leaped into danger, proving that courage knows no borders. At Lubyanka Station, not far away, Emily Johnson had just left the small cafe situated across from the station's main entrance, where she worked every evening to earn money. She was a 22-year-old student from a small town in America, studying history at Lomonosov University in Moscow, a chance she had won through a scholarship, though it wasn't enough to cover all her living expenses here. To pay for tuition in her rented room, she had been working at the cafe since she arrived in Moscow 6 months ago. The job was grueling, washing cups, brewing coffee, wiping tables, and standing from 6 p.m. until the cafe closed at 11:30 p.m., sometimes even later if there were still many customers. Tonight she finished her shift at 11:40 p.m., wearing her worn gray jacket with frayed sleeves and carrying an old battered backpack from her days in the U.S. I'm planning to catch the last train to her dormitory 3 stops away. Not very tall, about 5'3" with a slight build, Emily was used to the pace. Back in America, she had worked at a fast food joint to fend for herself, and here she kept on without complaint. Emily stepped out of the cafe, sipping up her jacket a bit higher to shield herself from the biting wind, taking a deep breath as her exhale steam turned into a fleeting cloud in the cold night air. She glanced at her wristwatch, 11:42, and then headed toward the station, ready to cross over and enter the terminal. Just then, a sharp scream rang out from the station's concourse, slicing through the nighttime noise like a knife. A black boy, perhaps around 10 years old, wearing a red jacket torn at the sleeve, had just slipped on the icy, snow-dusted platform and fallen onto the train tracks. His old worn shoes couldn't grip the snowy surface, and he tumbled down with a small thud, the sound of his jacket brushing against the rails sounding feeble amid the rising commotion. Nearby, people immediately sprang into action. A middle-aged man in a heavy fur coat standing just a few steps from the tracks shouted, "The train's coming!" A woman near the platform gasped, clutching her chest as she stepped back. 2 young men nearby shouted and pointed, "Hurry up!" Yet no one made a move. From the distant tunnel, the white lights of the subway flashed brilliantly, and the ear-splitting horn signaled the train was less than 10 seconds away. Inside a reinforced car, Putin heard the commotion, and glancing through the thick glass, his advisor asked, "What's happening, sir?" But before anyone else could speak, or Putin could react further, Emily was already running. She didn't stand watching like the rest of the crowd. She didn't wait for someone else to act or pause to wonder if she could do something. From across the street, far away from those gathered at the concourse, she dashed over, pushing aside a few people blocking the way, and jumped onto the tracks. She immediately stooped down to grab the terrified boy, whose tiny hands clung tightly to her jacket as if it were a lifeline. With a strong push, she hauled him up onto the platform, where an elderly man in a gray knitted sweater quickly bent over to pull him to safety. The train thundered past immediately afterward, its metal grinding against the rails, nearly brushing the tip of Emily's feet, while a powerful gust from the train's wake sent part of her jacket flapping. Clutching the edge of the platform with both hands, she pulled herself up, standing firmly on the cold stone as she panted, her legs trembling from the near-fatal dash. The boy was safe now, in his mother's arms, a woman who had come running from afar, screaming, "My son, Sasha!" while tears streaked down her pallid, fear-stricken face. Emily turned to the boy, asking in halting, mixed Russian and English that she'd picked up over the past few months in Moscow, "Are you okay?" The frightened child nodded weakly, saying, "I'm fine." She asked again, "Are you hurt?" Her voice, edged with fatigue and broken by labored breaths from her exertion, carried genuine concern. The mother looked at her and cried out, thank you so much. You're so kind." Emily simply nodded, offering no further words, and stayed until the boy had stopped trembling and clearly said, "I'm really okay." Only then did she step away from the dispersing crowd and leave the boy with his mother. Back in the car, Putin turned to the bodyguard in the front seat and asked, "Who is she?" The guard quickly checked his tablet and replied, "Emily Johnson, an American student studying at Lomonosov University. She works at that cafe." Putin's eyes narrowed as he pressed further. An American girl. Why would she do that? He couldn't fathom why she didn't run away like everyone else. The big men standing near the tracks, the strong young guys who could have acted but only shouted instead. The advisor suggested, "Perhaps she was acting on impulse, sir. Young people sometimes are." But Putin countered, "No, she knew the train was coming. Impulsiveness doesn't explain this." Emily had no clear reason to throw herself into danger. She didn't know the boy, wasn't fluent in Russian enough to call for help, and wasn't a local in charge of anything here. She was just a student finishing a late shift, planning to catch the train back to her dorm after a long day. From classes starting at 8 a.m. until 3 p.m., then working from 6 p.m. until nearly midnight. Yet when the boy fell, when the train horn blared and bright white lights illuminated the tunnel, she didn't stand idly by. She ran in, jumped down, and saved him without a moment's hesitation, refusing to let fear or the gap between her and safety hold her back. In America, such courage was hardly foreign. In 2001, when the Twin Towers fell in New York on September 11th, countless firefighters and police officers charged in while others fled. They lugged heavy oxygen tanks, ascending dozens of smoke-choked flights of stairs, all knowing that the building could collapse at any moment. Even though more than 300 firefighters lost their lives that day, they never turned back. They acted because people needed them. Although Emily wasn't trained like those heroes, she didn't carry oxygen or wear protective gear. When the boy fell, she didn't pause to decide. She sprinted in and pulled him to safety. Putin, peering through the glass, remarked, "They don't back down when someone is in need." After the rescue, Emily didn't leave the platform immediately. She had run across the street, jumped onto the tracks, pushed the boy up just in the nick of time before the train arrived, and then pulled herself up, all in under a minute. Everyone could see she was exhausted, her rapid, nearly broken breaths, her weak voice asking the boy if he was all right, her trembling hands as she gripped the platform edge to hoist herself up. She had just finished a grueling evening at the cafe, standing for over 5 hours washing cups, brewing coffee, and wiping tables, already worn down even before the incident. Her day had begun at 8 a.m., with European history classes lasting until 3 p.m., followed by a few hours rest before her shift from 6 p.m. But tonight, although she finished at 11:40 p.m., with the simple desire to return to her dorm and sleep, she stayed behind after saving the boy, checking on him repeatedly with questions like, "Are you okay? And are you hurt?" Each query punctuated by a heavy, labored breath. She wasn't built for enduring such hardship constantly, just a slight student living on meager wages that barely covered room rent, food, and a little saved up for textbooks. After mustering every ounce of strength to push the boy up and pull herself from the deadly cold of Moscow's night, she had every right to sit down or head off immediately. No one would have blamed her if she'd chosen to do so. The boy's mother even suggested, "You should rest now. You've done enough." A passerby nearby echoed, "Take a seat. You're exhausted." But Emily simply answered, "I'm fine," and continued standing, asking a few more questions until the boy clearly stated, "I'm really okay." Only then did she nod, step away, and leave the platform. This act wasn't simply an impulsive or reckless one. Emily could have left immediately after saving the boy. She had risked her life, expended every bit of energy after a long day of classes and work, and yet no one forced her to stick around. Instead, she persevered, not letting fatigue keep her from ensuring the boy recovered from the shock before she left. In America, such tenacity had been demonstrated through generations. From 1863 to 1869, during the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, thousands of American workers dug through mountain rocks and deserts under brutal conditions. They labored 12-hour days using hammers and pickaxes to carve through the Sierra Nevada, calloused hands, bloodied feet, and often starving or exhausted due to harsh winters or scorching summers. Over 1,000 workers perished from landslides, disease, or sheer exhaustion during those 6 grueling years. Yet the survivors pressed on, laying over 3,000 miles of railroad to connect America's east and west coasts, sometimes advancing only a few feet a day as nature fought back. They didn't stop, not because they never tired or were stronger than anyone else, but because they refused to let exhaustion dictate their actions. They understood that the work had to be finished not only for themselves, but for the country. That same spirit drove Emily on the platforms of Lubyanka that night. She wasn't a railroad worker digging through mountains or laying tracks, but when she was there with that little boy, she didn't walk away even though her body craved rest. She had just finished a long, exhausting shift, and yet, after running across the street, leaping onto the tracks and pushing the boy up, she stayed behind to check on him, every step costing her dearly in exhaustion and cold. A passerby had offered her an extra pair of flip-flops, and the boy's mother had even tried to give her some money, but she refused both. Emily didn't do it for accolades or recognition. No one at the station knew her name, nor would any official record note the incident. She did it because the boy needed her help, and she wouldn't let her personal losses or hardships stand in the way of doing what was right. Just like in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina in 2005, when thousands lost their homes and possessions, but reached out to help each other, even a man named John, who lost his house in the flood, used his small fishing boat to rescue neighbors from rising waters. Though he had neither food nor clean water, he shared his last bottle with a family he saved. Or like Mary, who lost her grocery store, yet used her bicycle to transport injured people to safety despite her own lack and misery. Over 1,800 people died in the disaster, yet tens of thousands survived because people like them refused to hoard what little they had for themselves. Emily, too, would not let her own misfortunes hinder her. When an older lady selling flowers at a makeshift wooden stand near the entrance saw what had happened, she hurried over holding a pair of old plastic sandals. "Hey, dear, come here. Take these sandals, your feet are freezing," the woman called out. Emily paused, looked at the sandals, and said, "No, you keep them and sell them instead." The old lady pressed, "You saved that boy. Let me repay you a little. Don't go barefoot in this cold." "No," Emily replied, "I'm fine," and continued on, even though every step on the snow added to the numb pain in her feet. The old lady muttered to herself, "That girl is something else. She takes nothing for herself." It wasn't that Emily was arrogant or shy. She could have accepted the sandals or a few rubles from the mother. No one would have blamed her after risking her life to save the boy, after losing a shoe and further tearing her backpack in the freezing Moscow night. But she refused, not because she didn't need them. Her feet were numb with cold and her hands still trembled as she clutched her backpack, knowing that tomorrow she would have to make do with what little she had left. She declined because she didn't save that boy to be compensated. She did it because it was the right thing to do, refusing to let personal loss dictate her actions. In America, this selfless spirit had been proven time and again. In 1967, when the Apollo 1 spacecraft caught fire during a launch rehearsal at a Florida pad, killing 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, NASA faced intense pressure from the public and Congress to scrap the program, calling the loss too dangerous and costly. Yet NASA did not stop. They dissected every detail of the tragedy, inspecting thousands of components, examining every wire and oxygen valve, then overhauled the spacecraft design and improved safety protocols. 2 years later, on July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11 lifted Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin onto the moon, turning a tragic failure into a monumental leap forward, not only for America, but for all humankind. They didn't let loss mark an end. They learned from it to ensure future missions wouldn't repeat the same deadly mistakes. Likewise, Emily wasn't content to let this night be just another story of a rescue. She couldn't change the station's policies, didn't have the power to fix the systems, or force anyone to take action. She was just a foreign student without fame or influence. But she left a message for the ticket collector, for the woman on the train, for the young man who had watched, an assurance that next time, if someone falls on the tracks or anywhere else, they wouldn't be left alone. She wanted others to learn from what had happened, so that Lubyanka Station would no longer be a place where people simply watched and shouted without doing anything. In America, this progressive mindset had turned setbacks into major turning points. When the Apollo 1 disaster struck, NASA didn't give up after the loss of 3 astronauts. They persevered for 2 more years, refining every detail, and took the world one giant step further. Emily wasn't sending anyone to the moon, but she planted a small seed, a small step under dire circumstances, to ensure that at Lubyanka or anywhere else, bystanders would eventually step in rather than stand idly by. The train rattled through several stops, gently swaying on the tracks, then paused at an intermediate station. A middle-aged woman in a fur coat got off, leaving Emily standing alone near the door, still clutching the cold metal handrail. A young man with headphones glanced at her one last time before slipping his headphones back into his pocket. as if deciding to pay more attention from now on. The train resumed its journey through dark tunnels, the lights at each station fleeting past the window like brief streaks in the night. Emily remained silent, lost in thought as she gazed out into the deep black outside, where station lights passed by like ephemeral beacons. A young man seated a few rows away, Dmitri, 19, an engineering student, had listened to the story on the train and removed his headphones to ask, "What happened to you? Why aren't you wearing any shoes?" Emily replied quietly, "I lost them when I was saving someone at the station. I'm all right." He pressed, "Then why didn't you call for help? There are people here who could have offered you something." Emily answered simply, "It's nothing. If you see someone fall, don't just stand there, okay?" The young man nodded silently, then, after a brief pause, kept watching her as if pondering his next move. Emily's words weren't mere idle chatter. She hadn't rescued the boy to gain praise or build a reputation. No one at the station knew her name, and no report would ever document the incident. But she didn't want tonight's events to fade into obscurity. She hoped that if someone else ever fell on the tracks or elsewhere, someone would rush to help rather than just watch. She wanted bystanders to learn a lesson from her words so that next time there wouldn't be a lone person running to the rescue. In America, such a forward-thinking spirit had repeatedly transformed setbacks into milestones. When in 1967 the Apollo 1 disaster struck, NASA didn't stop after losing 3 astronauts. They persevered, improved every detail, and eventually propelled the world forward. Emily may not have set anyone on a lunar trajectory, but she left behind a subtle idea, a small change in attitude, so that at Lubyanka Station, or anywhere else, people wouldn't merely observe disaster, but act when someone is in trouble. The train continued through several stops, swaying lightly on the tracks, and finally halted at Kuzminki Station, just a few hundred meters from Emily's dormitory, around 1 a.m. on April 9th. She stepped off the train onto the cold stone floor of the underground platform, where the snow had cleared, but the chill still permeated the air. She proceeded through the exit, up the stairs, and out onto the dark city streets, where the biting wind caused her thin jacket to flap unrestrainedly. She didn't hurry. She was too tired to run or rush, but she didn't stop either, nor did she return to ask for shoes or a warmer coat from anyone. She walked back to her dorm, a rundown 4-story building at the end of a narrow street, where she rented a small room at the lowest possible price in Moscow. Emily pushed open the door to her dorm, climbed the creaking wooden stairs, and went up to her second-floor room. She set her battered backpack on the floor. A history book was peeking out from its torn side, though she didn't retrieve it immediately. She slipped off her wet socks, revealing feet reddened by the cold, and then sat on the edge of her bed. Reaching for her notebook from the desk drawer, she opened it, and with a shaky hand still recovering from the long night, penned a few lines in messy handwriting. They just stood there watching. Next time, it must be different. She didn't write a long account of the rescue or mention the lost shoes. It was merely a fleeting thought, a reminder to herself. Closing the notebook, she tucked it back into her temporarily repaired backpack and lay down, closing her eyes and trying to sleep despite her aching, cold body. The next morning, Lubyanka Station bustled as usual. The snow had stopped overnight, leaving a thin white trace on the streets, though the chill still seeped through the coats of waiting passengers. Ivan Petrovich, the ticket inspector from the previous night, recounted the events to a colleague during the morning break. "Last night, a young American girl jumped onto the tracks, saved a boy, and told me not to let anyone fall alone. No shoes, no proper coat. She even went home barefoot." When asked who was she, Ivan replied, "I don't know her name. Just a student, I guess. She even went home barefoot." A woman colleague remarked, "That's so strange. Why didn't she ask for anything?" Ivan simply added, "If something happens, call me immediately. Don't just stand there." Elsewhere in the station, Dmitri, the young man from the train with headphones, waited for his next ride to school. Later, he recounted to a group of engineering classmates, "There was this American lady who saved someone at the station and told us not to just stand by if someone falls. She didn't have any shoes and she didn't take anything offered." One friend asked, "Why wouldn't she take something? Is she that poor?" Dmitri answered, "I'm not sure, but she said that next time it has to be different." He ended the call and, looking around at the station, removed his headphones to keep a more alert watch, quite unlike his usual habit of burying his face in his phone. At the same time, a few kilometers away at a school, the boy's mother, Natasha, a bank employee, dropped him off as usual. Sasha, the 10-year-old, recounted to his classmates, "Last night at Lubyanka, a foreign lady saved me from the train. She didn't take the money my mom offered." When another kid asked, "Why didn't she take it? Is she really that poor?" Sasha replied, "I don't know, but she told us not to let anyone fall alone next time." Natasha, hearing her son's story, said, "She's so kind. I must find a way to thank her." Sasha shook his head. "She doesn't want any thanks, Mom." The story spread at Lubyanka all day, through word of mouth rather than through the newspapers or any official record. It passed from one witness to another. Even began to watch more carefully whenever someone slipped near the tracks, immediately calling a colleague to assist rather than waiting for someone to ask, determined not to see a repeat of that night's events. Dmitri, on his way home on the train after class, kept his headphones in his pocket, scanning the crowd to see if anyone needed help instead of burying himself in music as usual. Natasha even stopped by the station office after work to ask the staff, "Has that American girl come by lately? I'd like to thank her for saving my son." The staff shook their heads. "I have no idea who she is. She's gone now." Though the incident was never formally recorded in the media, the accounts circulated throughout Lubyanka that day, subtly changing the people who witnessed it. Ivan was more vigilant every time someone nearly slipped on the tracks. He would call for help immediately instead of standing by. Dmitri, returning home after his classes, became more conscious of his surroundings rather than just focusing on his phone. And Natasha, after her shift, returned to the station office asking if anyone had seen the American girl, hoping to thank her personally. The events of that night had sparked small changes so that Lubyanka station was no longer merely a place where people watched and shouted, unwilling to act. Unaware of these ripples, Emily woke at 7 a.m. on April 9th after less than 6 hours of sleep, her body still aching from the previous night. She rummaged through her dresser for an old pair of sneakers, the worn-out pair she'd brought from America, with soles that had seen better days but still managed to function, since the pair she lost the previous night was the one she wore most often. Finding some needle and thread from a small sewing kit, she sat on her bed and slowly stitched the tear on her backpack strap. Each careful stitch a reminder that her hands still trembled from the long night. Lacking the funds to buy a new bag immediately, she knew she would have to use this one a few more weeks or even months until she could save enough. After dressing in her coat and donning a knit hat, she prepared for school as usual. Her European history class began at 8 a.m. And she couldn't afford to be late, even if she barely slept through the night. Before leaving her room, Emily opened her notebook, reading over the lines she had written the previous night. They just stood there watching. Next time it must be different. She didn't add any further details about rescuing the boy or about losing her shoes. It was simply a fleeting thought, a personal reminder. Closing the notebook and tucking it back into her patched-up backpack, she slung it over her shoulder and left the dorm, walking through the snow-covered streets to the nearby station. Not Lubyanka, but a smaller one closer to her dorm, to catch the train to school. Her feet still ached from the previous night's cold, yet she walked steadily, without complaint, focused solely on arriving in class on time. At school, Emily sat at the back of her history class, listening attentively as the professor lectured on the Russian Revolution, diligently taking notes even though her hands still felt weary. Her classmate Anya, a blonde Russian girl who sat beside her, asked, "Why do you look so tired today? Didn't you sleep?" Emily replied, "Last night was long. I'm fine." Anya pressed, "What happened? Tell me everything." Emily managed a light smile and said, "It was just something at the station. I helped someone who fell." Anya, curious, said, "You helped someone at the station? Tell me more." But Emily, not wishing to make much of it, simply said, "It wasn't a big deal. Just listen to the lecture," choosing not to elaborate further. To her, it was just another long night. Something she did because it had to be done, not as a badge of honor. Meanwhile, at Lubyanka station, the events of the previous night continued to spread by word of mouth. Ivan, the ticket inspector, recounted to another colleague during his lunch break, "That girl jumped onto the tracks, saved a boy, and told me not to let anyone fall alone. No shoes, no warm clothes, She went home barefoot. When his colleague asked, "Who was she?" Ivan replied, "I don't know. She was just a student, probably American." Dmitri, the young man with headphones, later told a group of his engineering classmates, "She saved someone at the station and said, 'Don't just stand there if someone falls.' She didn't have any shoes, but she didn't take anything either." When one friend asked, "Why didn't she take anything? Is she that poor?" Dmitri shrugged. "I don't know, but she said that next time things have to change." Natasha, the boy's mother, once again visited the station office after work and asked a staff member, "Has an American girl been coming by lately? I'd like to thank her for saving my son." The staff member replied, "I haven't seen anyone like that. She's already gone." Even though it wasn't featured in the newspapers or officially documented, her words at the ticket booth to the young man and to the woman on the train planted a small seed, a belief that next time, when someone falls, someone else will come running instead of just standing by. Unaware of all these ripples, Emily spent her day as usual. After class, she ate a simple lunch in the school cafeteria, a modest sandwich and a cup of hot tea, the cheapest items on the menu, then headed to the library to do more research for her paper on the Russian Revolution, despite her eyes stinging from lack of sleep. She never spoke of the previous night to anyone, nor did she think of it as some heroic feat. She simply did what needed to be done. However, at Lubyanka Station, the words she'd shared with the ticket inspector, the young man and the woman on the train echoed with meaning, and urging that next time, when someone is hurt, someone will step up to help, rather than remain a passive bystander. The next day, Emily went to work as always. She wore the same old sneakers from her dorm, a pair of faded athletic shoes with worn-out soles that still managed to get her through the day, and had patched up her backpack with needle and thread, its straps still loose but enough to hold her books. She arrived at the cafe at 6 p.m. Howard took her position behind the counter and began washing cups, brewing coffee, and wiping tables as she did every evening, not mentioning the events of the April 8th night to anyone, even though her hands still ached and her feet hurt from the cold. A regular customer, a kindly old man who drank black tea every evening, noticed and said, "You look really tired today. Did something happen?" Emily replied, "Last night was long. I'm okay." The old man advised, "Maybe take a little break. Don't overwork yourself." With a small smile, Emily assured him, "I'm fine, thank you." She never quit. Not when danger loomed, not when she was exhausted, not when it meant personal loss, and certainly not when she could make a difference. In Moscow, she wasn't just saving a boy. She was leaving behind a small lesson, not for fame or recognition, but because that was the American spirit. Never giving up, no matter what.